The year of 1865 was a monumental year in American history. In the Southeast, the American Civil War had officially drawn to a close, and the South was to be rebuilt. On October 31st, it would have been 1 year since Nevada had officially become a state. In the Midwest, the Union Pacific Railroad finally obtained enough financial support to begin construction of the first transcontinental railroad. And in the West, another railroad was about to begin construction. This railroad would connect the cities of San Francisco and San Diego, California. The Southern Pacific Railroad was born. 3 years later, the railroad would be purchased by a group known as the Big Four, and by 1900, the railroad would eventually run trains all the way to New Orleans, Louisiana. The Southern Pacific had a wide range of motive power, consisting everything from 060 shop switchers to the massive AC-class articulateds. And with every locomotive comes at least one whistle. In this video, we will be taking a look at every type of Southern Pacific whistle, from the shortest of single chimes to the tallest of 6 chimes, and everything in between. We will be looking at the shop-built, the mass-marketed, and some you may have never known were used on the Southern Pacific. We'll also discuss how they were built, what they were built for, the rough measurements. Do they sound good? Where might you be able to hear one today? All of that and more as we discuss the whistles of the Southern Pacific Railroad. Before we begin, let me settle the score. I'm not going to be talking about what whistles are generally used for or the science of how they work. Mark Huber has 2 videos for that topic. I'm going to be talking about the different whistle types, what they were designed for, how common they were, and if there are any left in preservation that you could hear. Also, keep in mind, there was very little standardization on steam locomotives, let alone whistles. The crews back in the steam era did, as I quote from a friend of mine, anything to everything in order to make whistles work. Name any modification, and I'm sure someone has tried it. Larger and smaller inlets in order to give a whistle more or less volume, gutted valves to use a separate valve, added parts to make a whistle work or sound different, hybrid parts to make a whistle work or sound different, modified chambers on the inside or outside, stampings or pattern numbers to show who or where something came from, other cosmetic changes, and there's always more. When I talk about these whistles, these are what I consider to be the standard or what these whistles are supposed to be. But there are always exceptions. As far as when these whistles were made, there are parts and markings that can show the age, but as far as an exact date, you really cannot find one. Also, for measuring the bells, my measurements are from the bottom edge of the chamber to the top of the chamber, not the edge of the bowl to the top of the chamber. Just note that that gap can vary. So with all that out of the way, let's begin the episode with the single chimes or hooter whistles. The first one we'll talk about is the rotary hooter. So the title I'm giving them should be a dead giveaway on what these whistles came off of. Now these vary depending on builders and other situations, but I'll focus on one that came off of a rotary snowplow built in the 1800s. So this whistle was 6 inches in diameter, the bell was round top and roughly 8 inches tall, equipped with a poppet-style valve, and made of brass. So the Southern Pacific had quite a few rotary snowplows on their roster, particularly because the ex-Central Pacific terrain over Donner Pass ran straight through the Sierra Nevada mountains. The rotary that I am referencing for this video was built by the Cook Locomotive and Machine Works. and the whistle was supplied to the rotary when it was built. Cook built rotary plows for many railroads, including the Southern Pacific, the Great Northern, the Denver Rio Grande, etc. Fun fact, OM on the DNRG was built by Cook. Back to the Southern Pacific rotary, there are a few of these whistles left in existence, and while I do not have an audio clip of this whistle specifically, I'll play an audio clip of a similar whistle at 200 psi. The next one we'll talk about is what I believe to be an early shop-built hooter. Now, I do not know a lot of information regarding this specific whistle. Two pictures featuring a 460 10-wheeler number 2149 and a 280 consolidation number 2622 had whistles that resembled an early flat-top Lunkenheimer hooter. Although my claim is just a theory, so take it with a grain of salt. The only evidence I have is the T10 and C4 class were probably built before the turn of the century, and Lunkenheimer started producing their ever-popular round-top whistles around the early 1890s. So the Southern Pacific could have copied the design. Not confirmed, but definitely possible. Aside from that, I have no information. This whistle I solely found off of historic photographs. The things you find when you do your research. Because of how elusive it is, I do not have an audio clip of this whistle. Now we move into the chime whistles. Chime whistles, of course, have more than one note. As far as I am aware, the Southern Pacific only used mass-marketed 3 chimes. So we'll begin with the smallest known 3 chimes used by the Southern Pacific. The first one we'll talk about is the Star Brass 3 chime. So Star Brass, like Crosby, was a whistle manufacturer located in Boston, Massachusetts. If you guys want us to, at some point down the line, we can touch upon the Star Brass Company. Back to the Southern Pacific, I'm unsure how many Star Brass whistles were used on the railroad, but one historic photograph is proof there was at least one. The AM2 class 2662 cab forward number 4207, which was later numbered to 3907, was initially fitted with one of these whistles. It's not known how long it was kept on. I'll also mention the MC1 number 4000 was also fitted initially with what I believe to be a Star Brass 3 chime, although I could not see the bowl to confirm. I do not know if this specific Star Brass 3 chime survives, but there are Star Brass 3 chimes out there. Here's one being blown at 195 psi. The next one we'll mention is the Lunkenheimer 3 chime. Lunkenheimer is located in Cincinnati, Ohio. They made valves, whistles, and other steam-related devices back in the steam era. And they still exist to this day, however whistles are no longer the priority. As evident from another photograph, the only Lunkenheimer that we know was used on the Southern Pacific was fitted to yet another AM2. This time, it was 3911. I am unsure how long the Lunkenheimer was used, but we know it was after the class received its 4-wheel lead truck. Once again, I have no clue if this specific Lunkenheimer survives, but Lunkenheimer whistles are found all over the country. Here is a similar one being blown at 200 psi. Alright, now we will talk about the whistles that everyone knows and loves. We will start with the Hancock 3-chime. Hancock was located in New York, and if you want to learn more about the Hancock Company, be sure to check out our previous episode where I dive deep into Hancock. However, I'll gloss over the Hancocks used on the Southern Pacific. So this type of whistle was famously worn by a decent number of the GS-class Northerns, and primarily used on passenger trains. The famous GS4 class number 4449 had a step-top variant of the Hancock long bell, and she still carries a Hancock long bell to this day. Now, I do not have an audio clip of 4449 specifically, but I have a couple clips of Hancock long bells being blown on other locomotives, including Norfolk and Western 611 and Union Pacific Big Boy 4014. Here's an audio clip of each one, both of which are being blown at 300 psi. It is not known if Southern Pacific ever used a 4-chime, but if they did, it was unpopular. Now we move into the Southern Pacific shop-built whistles. The first one we'll talk about is pattern LI5085, or better known as the Southern Pacific 5-chime. These whistles were 6 inches in diameter. The tallest note was roughly 7 3/4 inches tall. They were equipped with the Southern Pacific steel horizontal style valves, and the bells were made of cast iron. The LI in the pattern number stands for locomotive iron. Now these whistles have almost exactly the same chamber lengths as the star brass 5-chimes, similar to those used by the Union Pacific. It is not known which whistle came first, although if I had to guess, the Southern Pacific whistles came second. If you are trying to tell them apart, the main difference is the chamber dividers that are arched about 60 degrees clockwise from the bottom, and then a straight line from where it meets back up with the bell. Think of it as a scalene triangle with an arch on the B side. Unlike the star brass dividers, which are basically the shape of a wave. Aside from that, the bowls, the pattern numbers, and minor details, they are almost the same. Now the slang term for these whistles is the Desert 5-chime. The Southern Pacific ran through the states of Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, the western half of Utah, and the eastern half of California. The vast majority of that is desert, so I guess you can put 2 and 2 together to explain that. Anyway, these whistles were the second most common on the Southern Pacific. They had a high-pitched, shrill tone, and almost every freight locomotive class, including the massive 410-2s, had at least one of these whistles. Fun fact, the MK5 class number 745 had one of these in revenue service, although she does not carry one anymore. Now, preservation is a slightly different story. While these whistles are relatively common in preservation, there's really only one common locomotive to hear one of these whistles. That being Southern Pacific Narrow Gauge 460, number 18. However, there have been others used in preservation. On the East Coast, where I'm from, the Cass Scenic Railroad used one of these, and that's actually the one I will provide audio of. Here is the Southern Pacific 5-chime being blown at 200 psi.
next one we'll talk about is the long bell 5 chime. Now, I do not have a lot of information on this one, but I will tell you as much as I know. There is a drawing of this whistle at the California State Railroad Museum. There were only like 15 or 20 made, supposedly. They were made of iron, and sound-wise, they sound like the next whistle. As far as I know, only replicas exist, and none exist in preservation. The only replica of this that we know of was used on Southern Pacific number 2467. As a result, I do not have an audio clip of this whistle.
The last one we will talk about is pattern LB9299, or better known as the Southern Pacific 6 chime. These were 6 inches in diameter. The tallest note was roughly 12.5 inches tall. They were equipped with Southern Pacific steel horizontal style valves. The bells had the same style chamber dividers as the 5 chimes, and they were made of brass. The LB in the pattern number stands for locomotive brass. These whistles were first introduced in 1923, and then quickly became the bread and butter whistle of the Southern Pacific. They were used on everything from small shop-built switchers, medium-sized freight engines, the 2400 Pacifics, the GS-class Northerns, and the AC-class cab forwards. Without a doubt, they were the most common and best-sounding whistles on the Southern Pacific. As a result, they are extremely common in preservation. Southern Pacific number 2472 and number 786 both carry this type of whistle, and they pop up on tourist lines all over the country. We were able to capture 4 in our pursuit of filming Steam. The locomotives we'll play include the following: Reading and Northern 425, Norfolk and Western 475, Denver and Rio Grande Western number 476, and Central and New Jersey number 113. Fun fact, the one on 425 came off of GS4 number 4450. Here are 4 Southern Pacific 6 chimes being blown at 200 to 210 psi. quickly mention that these are highly popular to replicate. Here's an MD whistle's copy being blown at 200 psi. Well, that's it, everyone. That was every type of Southern Pacific whistle. Hopefully you learned something today. Be sure to click the I or go to my community tab to vote on the 4th episode. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to hit the like button, subscribe, share with a friend, and comment down below which type was your favorite. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time.